All right, good afternoon. My name is Selena Dorme. I'm the Manager of Engagement Capacity here with the First Nations Public Service Secretariat. I'm also a member of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation here in North Vancouver. I'm joining you today from our offices in West Vancouver on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I am pleased to announce the first Reverse Town Hall that the First Nations Public Service Secretariat is going to be putting on. This will be a series of Reverse Town Halls. I'd like to welcome our three speakers that we have today. If I could ask them to turn on their videos just very quickly so I can let you know who they all are. Right, we have Collette Sunday, Band Administrator with the Upper Nicola Band, Councilor Brian Holmes from Upper Nicola Band, and Chief Christopher Derickson from the Westbank First Nation. This Reverse Town Hall, they will be sharing their personal stories, experiences, and best practices in engaging with BC federal government during the pandemic. It is important to recognize that this is not necessarily FNPSS's advice, but hearing from First Nations directly. All of these people here today have a tremendous number of years of experience in working within their own communities and working with the federal government. So I'm super excited to kind of just get it underway. We're going to start off with Chief Christopher Derickson from Westbank First Nation, and then we'll hand it over to Upper Nicola Band. Over to you, Chief.
Well, thank you, Selena. Wow, so never done, I don't think I've ever spoken to a crowd this large. Unfortunately, I can't see you all, but I hope that what I get to share with you will be helpful and informative. How to engage with First Nations. I'm going to give you some very kind of high level principles that I hope you find helpful in terms of how you should approach First Nations. And I'll give you also hopefully a few examples if I have time about things perhaps not to do. And maybe that'd be a good place to start. So as you can see, I'm Indigenous. I am Sioux from the Okanagan Territory, coming to you from Westbank First Nation. I want to tell you some things I've heard said about me and other Indigenous people that I hope you should write down and not repeat. One of them is, oh, he's extremely well spoken. I speak English. Je parle un petit peu français. Je comprends, mais je peux pas parler très bien en français. Other things are, wow, you're extremely presentable. Other things I hear, wow, look at you, you're extremely well educated. Good for you. By the way, I have 3 post-secondary degrees and teach in post-secondary as well. Now, the problem with these comments is that I never hear them spoken about non-Indigenous people. I don't hear people say, oh, look at that. John Smith over there, is he ever well spoken, very well put together, and very well educated? And the reason you don't hear that is because I understand that perhaps a well-educated, well, I guess I'm well-dressed. My wife said my outfit looks good today. I guess I have a few degrees, but those compliments, or what you might think are compliments, are coming from a place of privilege in your life. And you're seeing these Indigenous people come up, and you might have this tendency to want to congratulate the Indigenous people for making it and showing the world that Indigenous people also belong here. So I think we need to just stop that and realize from a very human perspective that you and I are Homo sapiens. We are human beings, and we have different cultures and languages that define us and that separate us, and perhaps draw lines on maps that should not be there, these imaginary lines. And they exist between Indigenous communities, non-Indigenous communities, and on a national scale as well. The point being is that there are certain principles in human interactions that you need to keep at the forefront of your mind of how do you engage with First Nations people. So the first one, it's always a good idea to get to know each other. If you are at a dinner party or at any sort of social event and you're like me, you find a place where you can stand against the wall and just watch everybody and hope you don't have to talk to anyone. But then sometimes somebody comes up and wants to engage, perhaps because you're well-dressed, well-spoken, and well put together. And then you start to talk, and there's certain rules of engagement when you talk with somebody. There could be first just small talk about the weather. But the more you interact, and say you see that person at another event, you start to get to know each other just based on these unwritten rules about how you engage with people. You start to ask about their family. You start to ask about their employment. And I know in non-Indigenous culture, perhaps it's untoward to ask too many pointed questions. But in Indigenous culture, as soon as we know you're Indigenous, we're gonna make fun of you. We just have this instant connection. We're gonna ask who you're related to. We're gonna ask who your cousins are. And most likely in Indian country, other Indigenous people you meet are somehow related through marriage, or perhaps just they're your long lost cousin. But the point being is that what I find very helpful engagement, and we're going through this right now with a number of our government proponents, is to just get to know each other. Don't Google us. Don't go to the internet. Don't ask somebody who's worked with that First Nation. Like we do this, I know, also when it comes to personal relationships, but please don't do that when you're working with Indigenous people. What's helpful is to get to know us and to set that table when you're working with Indigenous people. And that doesn't mean coming in thinking you know something about us, because you don't. You might know something someone else has told you. You might know something the internet's told you. And what we've put on the internet, what we want you to know about us at first blush. But what you need to do is build that relationship and come to those Indigenous communities you're working with and get to know them. There are distinct cultures and languages, even between communities that share a nation. You're going to hear later from Collette Sunday and from Councilor Brian Holmes. And Brian's just over the hill here from Upper Nicola, part of the Sioux Nation, part of the Okanagan Nation, but very different in terms of how their community might see the world, understand it. Sure, there are some shared norms, but Westbank is a very different entity and community from Upper Nicola. So to come in thinking, oh, they're Okanagan, they're both going to be the same, is a faux pas. We just recently, so point number one is get to know us, build a relationship, ask questions, things not to do when you're getting to know us. And please, if you did this, I forgive you, and it's okay. But you'll notice today that I did not wear my Indigenous tie. But what I see a lot of non-Indigenous people doing when they come to meet with us here at Westbank First Nation, they'll set up my boardroom table here, and you'll notice they'll flap their tie around a little bit. And it's the Indigenous tie, the one, with the West Coast designs on it. And I'm looking like, well, we're Sioux, we're Okanagan. We're not West Coast, so I don't know what your tie means. Or the women will come in with that one shawl they got, and I don't know, maybe if you wear these things every day, cool, be yourself, do your thing. But we noticed that stuff. The one set of earrings you got at a powwow you went to, by the way, our people, well, we do have people that do powwow. Powwows are not a traditional part of our culture. So when you come in flashing your big fancy beaded earrings from a powwow, cool, good, I hope you like them. But you know what? The point is, just be yourself, act natural. You don't have to put on a front for us. We just want, also, just as much as you want to get to know us Indigenous people, we want to get to know you, because I still don't know. I've been in politics 8 years, and it's still a black box in terms of what goes on in the federal government. So we need to get to know each other and build that relationship. We just recently here at Westbank First Nation hired a new CAO, and he's coming from Ottawa, a 15-year career with the federal government, former Director General for the Canadian Coast Guard. His name is Simon Melanson. He claims some people out there in Zoom land today might know him. If you know him, I don't know what to say, I'm still getting to know the guy. Seems like a nice guy, but he's given me some speaking notes that I want to share with you that I find funny, that I think will be helpful, because it's an insight from his side. He has been on the other side of the table. He says, as the bureaucrat with sweat running down his back as he meets with Indigenous people. not knowing anything and not understanding what he's getting into. So he says here, these are Simon Melanson's, we'll call them maybe 10 points to good Indigenous engagement from what his experience has been. So Simon says, I've been waiting all day to say that. Simon says, get your facts straight. The internet, it's mostly pornography and propaganda. I am not questioning what is on his search engine. I'm just saying this is what Simon wrote. The most useful and relevant information comes from us. The next time you write a memo about us to your deputy minister or your minister or your manager or however the federal government's arranged, we can help because you might be surprised what we actually know about ourselves. This will also save you time and energy when dealing with all your ATIP requests. No idea what that means. Also, we can help you with your staff training. So stop sending your staff and spending your training budgets on spam courses that come on the fax machines. And I know you all still have them in your office. I think he means fax machines. I remember those. Your organization would be much better served by taking a course on First Nation culture and history. And we can help for a small fee. And by the way, I will say this, there's no need to go out and take an Indigenous training or awareness course offered by non-Indigenous people. There is absolutely no reason. There was a time and place perhaps in Canadian history when that was necessary, but there are so many well-spoken, well put together, well-educated Indigenous people who can talk to you and teach you about themselves. So if you are hiring non-Indigenous consultants to do this type of work, I'll just leave it there. So he goes on to say, we too are a national government and an employer of choice. Now, this is Simon. Simon says, don't get on at me. The federal government has long branded itself as an employer of choice, and I hear a lot from boomers that your job security and pension is great. But we have you beat in a number of areas, including less red tape, more empowerment, more innovation, more community, and training opportunities that don't continuously refer to the Financial Administration Act. No idea what that is. The proof, we're poaching Gen X and millennial high performers. I think he's one of those. Our new CAO, Simon, says he jumped ship from the Coast Guard and our CHRO, and we also poached our human resources director from the Nunavut government up north. So the point being is that Simon's trying to make the point here, though, that Indigenous governments are an employer of choice. Things are changing. The world is changing. How you engage with us needs to change as well. And I hope you get the very simple message I have given you here today, is that it's so important to get to know each other. And how many of you listening right now out there in Zoom land live on Indigenous territories of peoples you've never met, never in your life thought to get to know? And please, right now, that doesn't mean go Google them. Maybe instead of doing that, take a trip out to the local reservation to get to know those people on whose lands you're living. Take time to participate when there's community events, to get to know the Indigenous communities around you. And if you're in negotiations or going into funding discussions or meetings with Indigenous people, please don't rely on Google. Take time to get to know us. What I am learning is in Michum here at Westbank First Nation is the most valuable relationships we build and the most productive are the ones where we've taken time. And these are longtime partners that we're reestablishing relationship with, because we've realized we need to take the time to allow them to get to know us, because we've had these agreements with, like, say, Interior Health for years, working relationships with them for years, but they've never actually taken the time to get to know us. And we've paused those relationships to tell them about us, who we are, how we function, how we operate, what our culture and language is, how many members we have, what the social issues are we're facing. And it's so important. And they've found this so important to them. They've taken hours out of their day and number of their staff's time to take part in these very, what you might think are unimportant introductory sessions with us. So I hope that's been helpful for you today. I hope it's given you some pause for thought. And to just remember, at the end of the day, when you're dealing with Indigenous people, you're dealing with people. So I see.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Chief Derrickson. I've got to say, by now everybody's probably wondering, how did this event even all come together? The reverse town hall, where did it come from? So I'd like to recognize it's part of a unique and important initiative, a memorandum of understanding between the BC Federal Council and the First Nations Summit and FNPSS, including 17 federal departments and agencies. Over the past couple of years, we've had a chance to build a really great relationship, or the FNPSS has, and this idea, which is not a brand new idea, it's not a brand new concept, but should come together by some of the folks working on this committee, on this initiative. So the Strengthening Public Service Institutions Initiative, which is what it's called, is based on the principle of reciprocal learning with the dual objective of achieving increased experience and knowledge within First Nation administrations, as well as improving Indigenous awareness and understanding within the federal public service. So I'd like to now call on our next two speakers. Collette Sunday, Band Administrator from Upper Nicola Band, and I think Councilor Brian will be joining us shortly. There are some comments about whether or not this is being recorded and or can be shared. Yes, it is being recorded. It will be available on the FNPSS YouTube channel by the end of this week, which is tomorrow. So please feel free to share. There will be more sessions that come up over the next few months. So there will be a survey too as well after this webinar ends, asking for your suggestions and your input on what the next topics should look like. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Collette now.
All right, can you see my slide?
No, we're not screen sharing quite yet.
Okay, just a moment then. Oh, here we go. I think we got it there.
Here we go.
Okay, why Hushkahalt and Shy Squeeze Collette Sunday, Kentel Spuckman, Mishtam Tui Bernard Manuel Senior, A Tum Rita Manuel. So I come to you from our First Nation that is located between east of Merritt, south of Kamloops. So I'm not sure I'm sure many of you, if you're from British Columbia, yeah, you've been in our area, God's country. So we are one of 7 Silk First Nations. As the crow flies, we're probably 45 minutes from where Chris is sitting. If you were to take the highway, then it's going to take you a little bit longer. We have a membership of 980, of which 40% reside on reserve. Of course, we'd want that to be more, but we need to have more housing. We need to have more economic development opportunities. We need a lot. So definitely those are goals that we're working towards. So we have a land base on reserve of over 30,000 acres, and within our traditional territory, 928 hectares. So you can imagine how much responsibility we have, not only to our people, but first and foremost to our land. So areas of responsibility, I have just put in this slide just a quick overview of, if you were to look at what are my areas of responsibility as administrator for a First Nation, I am overseeing all of these programs here, and second to that, we have our elected chief and council, in which we have Chief Harvey McLeod as our chief, and we have 9 council members. We have our Upper Nicola Band Development Corporation, but if I come back here and focus a little bit on the administration, I'm not sure, most feds may know, I'm not sure about provincial employees, but First Nations have a vast responsibility. We are delivering all federal programs that include education, lands, community services, including capital, operation, maintenance of those assets, housing, water, ensuring we have potable water, social development programs, membership. We're responsible for providing health. So unique to British Columbia, as we know, is the tripartite agreement. So we have our health department. We have the Naquala School, in which we offer K to 12. We have a language and culture program. So if you were to look at Insilkjin, it's a it's a language that needs some assistance. We're working to revitalize it every day. And how many people are interested in doing that? How many people can actually carry out full-time language studies? It's minimal, to tell you the truth. We only have less than 15 fluent speakers in our community of 980. So how do we actually focus on that when we are tasked with managing so many other responsibilities? Finally, we have our cultural heritage department. We're going to share a bit about the work that our cultural heritage department does, because a lot of their work is driven by external requests, proponents that are wanting to put development X, Y, Z, or A, B, or C within our territory. In addition to that, we have had to become very active as far as it goes in terms of emergency management. So back to 2017, 18, 19, 17, 18, 19, we had a break in 20, and now we're into or 20, we started the emergency response. And so people that are working in these administration roles are also covering off an EOC role. So we don't have a centralized or a separate emergency operations center. No, we're wearing dual hats. So many people that are sitting in our offices today, we had to take a part of our day to help out with emergency response in our community. So if you were to look across the province, we'd probably be considered a medium-sized First Nation, of which you have some First Nations that are as small as 100 members, maybe less than 50 members. We have 980. What's the largest First Nation in British Columbia? You're going to be looking at 2,500, maybe max 5,000, but you will have some tribal councils that will be serving all. So Upper Nicola, we've been responding to two emergencies, the COVID-19, as everyone else has across the province and the country and the world. Second to that, we have had our spring floods that we've had to respond to. So that yet again takes more energies to have people working to respond and provide assistance to our own people. We don't allow third parties in to manage our issues and deal with our people. No, we'll do that ourselves. So realities of First Nation administrations. First Nations are typically underfunded, understaffed, and are functioning at a lower capacity level than our other organizations. Some First Nations may not even have key positions staffed. Like if you were to think about it, out of the 200 First Nations in the province, how many of them do not have a band administrator sitting in their office today? I know I heard one chief on a Zoom call in the last 2 weeks in which she said, I'm not only carrying out the chief duties, but I'm also doing education manager duties this week. And I'm doing this, I'm doing that. So similar to that, in our First Nation, this is just an example. As administrator, I'll be covering off EOC director responsibilities. I'm the superintendent to the school. Our income assistance workers also taking care of Indian registry, membership duties. Our language manager was our EOC logistics section head. Our director of community services has multiple hats. So he's not only doing director of community services, responsible for capital projects. We're looking at a 24 housing unit project coming into our community, doing other infrastructure projects. He's also our section head in our operations, in the operations section head in our EOC, and he's also the acting CEO for our development corp. So there's only 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week. So you can imagine all of the work that we are held responsible to move forward if we want to have a prosperous community. And second, final example I have on here is our land manager. Our First Nations land manager is not only responsible for responding to requests that come from chief and council and our membership to support them around lands and estates, any proposed developments, but also she's also our ESS director. So helping all of those people that have been that are displaced from floods or helping to respond to COVID supports. So if you were to think about that, looking overall in the province of BC, these are some of the stats that we've received from BC AFN. Total First Nation cases of COVID across the province as of January 2nd were 2,065, of which 514 were active. If you were to look at the second stats down below, how many of the offices are actually open in First Nation country? There's community closures of 131. So they may have security allowing people not to enter their community. They may be, there's 86 of us First Nations that have put in place a local emergency, a declaration. We have 111 EOCs activated. And then from there, we have 89 First Nation offices closed. So Upper Nicola, we've never closed our offices totally. We've had, when the pandemic first hit and a couple of times throughout the pandemic response, we've had some of our staff working from home, but for the most part, we've always had somebody in the office. So to that end, or to that point, the work never ends. First Nations continue to be consulted regarding projects in our territory. So just this year, we've received 280 referrals and have had the time and capacity to respond to probably 50% or less of those. UNB's had to prioritize. We always have, and First Nations across the country do. We have to prioritize and respond to those that we can, that are looking at, we determine those that have the most, we believe that will have the most impact on our territory, and the timeframes that the proponent are working under. If you think about just some of these major projects that are coming into our territory, Upper Nicola spent, we've spent time ever since 2013 looking at the Trans Mountain Expansion Project. So I just talked to a staff member this morning. I said, give me a date. Like how long have we been working on this? We're in 2021. So this is over 7 years we've been working on this, and there's still a lot of work on that file. In terms of the Indigenous Advisory Monitoring Committee, we've had membership, in which Chief Harvey is one of the co-chairs at one time, and we've had one of our staff members from Cultural Heritage that has taken a big part of her work day, work week, work year to allocate time onto these committees. And it's only because we want to have our principles, our traditional knowledge reflected into these government processes. There's numerous forestry referrals. And final point on this one is proponents are making requests for responses for their turnaround time. They would like to see some of these referrals responded to in perhaps 2 weeks or less. So in addition to this, we've been contacted by federal programs to implement all ISC programs as noted. Most recently, Census 2021. I've dealt with Canada Post in the most recent week or so. And if you think about it, most importantly, we as First Nations, we're all working on other work that is important to us to implement our self-inherent rights. All of the above is not really our business. That's external business that's brought to our table. We have our own agenda. We have our own strategic plans, our own comprehensive community plans. So that a lot of the time could be pushed to the back burner because we have all of this proposed work that's being brought forward. So keep in mind, First Nations are doing their best to balance the response to the local emergency due to COVID and their day-to-day jobs. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Holmes, and he'll speak on recommendations on best practices to consider.
Thanks, Collette. Hey, everybody. Just wanted to highlight maybe some of the pre-COVID processes, in relation to these pictures. The former Minister Sohi coming into community and really just not really doing business, but just meeting and having conversations and understanding our community. And the other pictures are part of the National Energy Board group, Peter Watson, I think Brian Chambers and Angela Silver came into our community, as you see, riding one of the community members' horses, and just engaging and understanding each other on a personal human level, and not worrying about papers and sitting at a conference table. We actually had lunch before that day at the historic Coshana Hotel, which is just down the road from our community. And feedback from this group that participated, I think particularly Peter Watson, it was a change in experience for him. And just seeing our community and hearing every time we talk to him, this is what we're fighting for, and what we live with. It's not business for us, it's our livelihood. So it's really challenging to work with government and other proponents that we don't know, sometimes never meet, or even see their faces. When culturally we are a gathering people and like to communicate and connect that way, especially on the land. even more so on the land. So having events or gatherings like this with government is crucial. It's all about relationship, getting to know each other on a personal level. So then that builds a little bit of trust that, you're actually here for a real purpose and not just for the job. If that's the case, then get out of here. We don't want to talk to you. We'll work with the ones that do care and do want to listen and understand the trials and tribulations that our community members and our ancestors have went through. Indigenous service workers, the Indian Act, if you don't understand that and the implications that act has had on our community, then you should, because it's a big problem, and it's a problem we still deal with. In understanding the governance piece of Indigenous communities, as Chief Derrickson mentioned, each community is different. Each governance system is different, and that's the same between federal government, provincial government, and Indigenous government. And it's recognizing that and working together on those. The latest piece, at least within provincial, is the rollout of the DRIPA. And what that is, they are still using the word consultation, which is, to me, I say, throw that word out. Why are you using that? It needs to be a partnership, and that's how we need to move forward. And it's only going to get better once we realize that's how we need to engage. Now with COVID, it makes it a little bit more challenging to accommodate a session like these. So makes it even more challenging, but it's nonetheless, there needs to be the effort to engage and understand who you're working with, who you're sending information to. Colette's got so much stuff that we as chief and council demand for her, and as well as the community members, that she's doing 100 things at once, and on top of it trying to deal with 10 chief and council members, plus just under 1,000 community members, and then we have external agencies sending stuff in and expecting a timeline to be met. It was really hard when COVID first hit. We weren't quite prepared for having people work at home and being able to access their computers or the database system we have. So it really put us even further behind on dealing with some of the stuff that are coming externally. So now we've kind of caught that up and got everybody what they needed to work at home, and it's a catch-up game, and it's very tiring, especially sitting on this computer, from 7 in the morning until sometimes 10 at night, from one meeting to the next. It really plays on us mentally, it plays on our community mentally, given some of the historical traumas that our communities have dealt with and still need to heal. Yet business outside continues. Trans Mountain's still being built. Referrals, permits are still being approved by government. So how do we, put that message out there, say, slow down. Let's have a little look at, what impact it's having to the communities, because it's not going to end well. Continuing that way, or it's just going to completely shut down. And that's not a great way to build a country and build a relationship with the first peoples of the land. So it's really comes down to people and how people are personally, in my case anyways. I know whenever I meet with a government representative, it's, the first questions are, who are you, where are you from, do you have family? What are your interests? If you don't want to share, that's fine, but at least it opens that conversation up. I guess the other thing that at least I've pushed with on engaging during COVID is still check-ins. You know, we've got stuff with government that they have their timelines, and I have mine. But I say, hey, let's schedule a check-in every 2 weeks. Let's have a 30-minute call, even if it's just to say, I haven't looked at it yet, and say, how are you doing? How's your community doing? And that's it. Then that trust and respect keeps going. And I think we'll leave it there, as I think my time is up. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Councillor Brian Holmes and Collette Sunday from Upper Nicola Band. Much appreciated. We have a few minutes for questions. Collette, thanks. I just stopped screen sharing. I'd like to ask Chief Derrickson to come back. We have 3 people who would like to ask a question live, so I'd like to actually start there and ask you to turn on your video and your audio and go ahead and ask your question. Jackie Mason. Oops, I think I muted you after you unmuted yourself. Sorry.
Sorry, my hand was up in error, but if I've got the opportunity, I will ask a question. What the current job I have right now is with the federal government. I'm the manager of the Indigenous Support and Awareness Office for Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and we work very closely with our Indigenous science folks in our science and technology branch. And some of the things they talk about sometimes is the fatigue that they feel as employees, because when it comes to other departmental committees and things wanting to know information, they'll come to us, they'll come to the other science and technology branch Indigenous employees and expect that we have all the answers for all of the Indigenous concerns. So I'm just wondering, do you find that as well, that you'll have different representatives or different federal communities or committees coming to you and asking you for information or things about your culture and your history over and over and over again?
Thank you so much for your question. I'd like to just ask any of our panelists, you can jump in to respond to Jackie's question. Nobody? Chief Derrickson, are you about to unmute?
I was watching Collette and Brian, and it looks Collette got there first.
Go ahead.
It's a race to the mute button.
I'll respond to that question, and along there's another question here, a few I could maybe blend together in the Q&A.
Sure.
What would your advice be, from Natalia? It says, what would your advice be for building relationships with communities? We cannot go to the communities to meet because of the pandemic. And then there's another one here about a little more pointed question about how does one ensure they're not burdening Indigenous peoples by asking questions about their cultures. One discourse in the BIPOC community is that it's not our duty to educate those around us, therefore we should stop. Yeah, so I have a differing opinion on that. And I know that opinion might come across strongly from others, but first to your question, I forget your name, who asked it. It was Jackie. Are we overburdened? You see from Colette's presentation, absolutely we're overburdened with consultations, with engagements, with the number of external files that any First Nation in BC or across Canada might be carrying, with very, in some cases, limited capacity. But this is why I think it's a great idea. We could start, instead of going to the Google, maybe ask the First Nation, is there an elder we could talk to and pay to learn about your First Nation? They can be hired as a consultant. In terms of whether or not it's our, and to that comment about whether it's our responsibility to educate you, I definitely see it. It's my responsibility to educate you about my people, the Syilx people and Westbank First Nation. But I can't speak to you and educate you on behalf of Upper Nick. And I don't think Google can either. But in terms of being an Indigenous person and trying to represent all Indigenous people, I think that's kind of what that comment is aimed at. That's not my responsibility. Nor is it something that I feel comfortable doing. But in terms of how do you do this in the age of the pandemic? Well, I find that Zoom has actually been very helpful, Zoom or whatever you're using, Blue Jeans, to connect, because you can connect quicker, it's cheaper, and I find that I'm starting to get used to the human connection over Zoom. It's not ideal, but obviously you heard from Councilor Holmes how important it is to go into community, learn and hear and build that relationship. So I hope that's helpful. Kind of jumped between answers there.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Collette, to also respond.
Yeah, I think you're going to hear, it's amazing, because if you look at First Nations across Turtle Island, whether I be here sitting in Spuckman in my own community or go to my husband's community in Akwesasne, which is in Mohawk territory, and there's so many things that we have in common. And they're like 15,000 in Canada and 10,000 in the States, or like they got 15,000 people living in the community. And this is like 450 people living in our community. There's a lot of things that are similar, but there's a few things that are different. There's things that we're gonna have in common with Chris's community, but there's gonna be a few things that are different. So there's gonna be some commonalities across the board. So if anyone can take some type of an Aboriginal 101, People's 101 course from a First Nation institution, take for instance like NVIT or other organizations, they can bring those into your offices, and they're gonna have a First Nation instructor to help you lead. And you're going to see from that person's eyes, that instructor's eyes, but you're going to see some basic information that's going to be applicable to all of us. So I think there's many ways to learn. Yeah, definitely.
Thanks so much. Councillor Brian, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I would say it's really comes down to just engaging, right? I've had a few incidences where some permits were put through and engaged with, I think it was Fish and Wildlife. Went into their office giving them heck because we weren't informed that they were poisoning a lake within our community. And their comment was, well, we don't have a Aboriginal liaison. I just said, so you need one of those to pick up the phone and call me. And so after that conversation, we have a good relationship with them. And the education piece, I think, is more of the historical and understanding, residential school, the Indian Act, because right now the governance is changing. So everywhere you go, it's going to be different, hereditary, Indian Act government. So it's going to be challenged to pin down and understand that piece of it without going into community or having that special connection.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We're at the end of our time, but we have one more person, Kevin Force, who wants to ask a live question. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to do that because we won't be able to get around to the 15 other questions we have in the Q&A. So if you can go ahead and unmute, or where did you go? There you are. Go ahead and unmute, and you can turn on your camera too as well. Kevin Force.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry, there's a bit of lag. I just have a question for everyone here, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. I'm working on a pan-Canadian program that's looking at rolling out in the coming months. There's going to be an Indigenous component to that program, and we have been given a very small amount of time to do engagement and consultation and partnership building on that program. Recognizing that we have these timelines that we are being told to abide by, but we want to do an engagement that is meaningful, that actually can get input, and it has to be national in scope. And like this is a problem. I can't do a good engagement. I can't go and have a one-on-one conversation about how this program is going to support 630 plus in, First Nation communities, 51 Inuit communities and Métis communities. What advice would you give to people in a position where they have strict kind of like timelines that they're being imposed on them, but want to make a meaningful mechanism for engaging Indigenous people.
Thank you, Kevin, for that question. I saw some chuckles because we were all too familiar with that. So whoever wants to jump in and take a stab at that, please go ahead.
I was actually just answering this question by an anonymous attendee who talked about the same thing, limited time funds. I was going to say, I think globally, as the federal government, provincial governments across Canada move to implement UNTRIP, there's going to have to be some substantial and material structural changes to how government operates. I understand timelines, I understand deadlines, I understand you have your performance targets you need to meet. But ultimately, it's about educating the federal government, because what I heard anyway from Collette, from Councilor Holmes, is how important relationship and understanding that context the First Nations are working in is to building these relationships. When you're doing, and then to that question, when you're doing these mass federal or national engagements, I've seen them done very well and sincerely, understanding they're under tight timelines. And I've also seen them done very poorly. I think the best thing you can do is to work with established Indigenous consulting firms to manage your engagement, and even maybe do it in each province. There's going to be a number of Indigenous consulting firms owned and operated. That's the world I came from, by Indigenous people that you could use, that will have standing, that will have a certain reputation you can build on with First Nation communities to make sure that engagement is sincere and meaningful. So that's it.
Yeah, and I think just to add on to that, I think you need to look at, don't start from scratch. There's definitely a lot of information, a lot of good information out there, and build on that. So if you can do your homework and say, hey, I've learned that this is a good practice, this is something that worked well, I want to just build on that and try to find a First Nation or an Aboriginal group that's championing that right there, and start there. Start small and then it grow big, because if you can find a good success and let that ripple out, then you can see some positive movement, I think.
My first thought to that question is don't do it. It's such a short timeline, and it's not going to work. And that's been the problem for years and years, that this rolls out, quick timeline. Does it really help? I think the problem or the issue governments have, and I think all levels of government, is, so the key word is engage. I'm not using consult, but engage First Nations in these processes at the beginning, before this is even considered being rolled out. You need to engage, and then it's going to go out more smoother.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. We're 5 minutes over our time, so we're going to have to wrap up. But as I mentioned, this is the first of a few, or maybe a series to come, of reverse town halls. So please fill out the survey. You'll be prompted to complete it when this webinar ends. So please fill that out. We want your feedback. We want suggestions on topics. These folks are just so experienced and have years and years of working both within their communities and attempting to work with the federal government too as well. And I know that there are a number of other experienced First Nations people that we could continue to bring to these reverse town halls to share, so that you have a variety of experience to hear from, because we are not all the same. So I want to thank you all so much for taking your lunch hour to spend it with us and listen to us. Stay tuned for the survey, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, which will be shared. Chief, do you want something to say, or are you just saying bye? Just saying bye. Thank you all. Stay healthy and safe out there, and we will see you at the next reverse town hall. Bye-bye.